Hi, it's Craig from Craig's To-Do List with our new Book Buzz podcast. Really exciting and original title, Book Buzz. Okay. Today I'm going to talk to Tessa Wegert, who is the author of the popular Shayna Merchant Mysteries. If you haven't heard of Tessa, all her books take place in the Thousand Islands. There's some great details here about the Thousand Islands, and they all involve Shayna Merchant, who is a detective.
Yes, she's an investigator with the New York State Police.
Right. So this series started with Death in the Family, then The Dead Season, Dead Wind, The Kind to Kill, Devil's at the Door, and The Coldest Case. So, Death in the Family, The Dead Season.
There's a theme with these titles, you can tell.
Dead Wind, The Kind to Kill, Devil's at the Door. And she's specifically here to talk about the newest one called The Coldest Case. Talk us a little bit about, first of all, the character of Shayna Merchant in the series, and then we'll talk about the current book.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on. So Shayna Merchant, as I said, she's a senior investigator with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, part of the New York State Police. She is actually originally from Vermont, spent some time working for the NYPD. The series begins with her having just moved to Alexandria Bay with her fiance, who was a local. And she really wants to get away from this traumatic abduction experience that she had investigating a serial killer in New York City. So she moves upstate thinking that she's going to have a nice, peaceful time. Originally doesn't even intend to do any more police work, but finds she misses it, takes a job with the state police. And her very first case, which is the case that I talk about in Death in the Family, the first book in the series, is Shayna finding herself on a wealthy family's private island where one of the family members has gone missing. There's blood in the bed. There is a storm closing in, a nor'easter. There's a killer on the loose. It's really one of these locked room mysteries, kind of like a nod to the detective fiction of the golden age. And then that book just kicked off a series. Readers were interested in it. They seemed to want more. My publisher was excited about it. And so now I'm at the 6th book in the series, which is The Coldest Case, which is brand new.
Right. Let's back it up a little bit and talk a little bit about how you picked this location. What is your relationship or affiliation with this area? We have so many people in this area that nobody knows about us. Nobody ever writes about us. Nobody ever talks about the Thousand Islands, but it's such a beautiful area and it's a really specific lifestyle. How did you decide to set the books here?
Yeah, I love that question. And that was one of the things that drew me to writing this as the setting and choosing this as the setting for the very first book. And then, of course, for the entire series was that I started coming here about 20 years ago. My now husband, then boyfriend, his parents have a place up here. And so I started to visit. I had never been here before. And I couldn't believe that this area even exists. I mean, it was just so unlike anywhere else I had ever been, and so pristine, and I was fascinated by the culture and, the summer people coming in and spending so much time, part of the year just like the population ballooning, and then the rest of the time, the residents, the year-round residents, and the kind of dichotomy between them, the relationship between them, those dynamics, the history of the area, and, these kind of cream of the crop people who used to come from New York City and, the titans of industry that originally built these grand homes around here. So all of that was so fascinating to me, and it seemed like so much fodder for storytelling and also just so much interesting atmosphere for a mystery series.
How has the local people that have read these books, have any of them communicated with you? And because people love to complain in this area, and people love to say you didn't really capture it. And I will say, the one that I read, this book, I was really impressed by how you got into Alexandria Bay, and it felt like we were in Alexandria Bay, and you knew that area so well, including the market on Walton Street, which we all know. And I felt that this is somebody who really knows the area well. And I think that probably really endeared you to some people, because we're all looking for ways to pick it apart. And another thing that's really indicative of this lifestyle is the boat, right? So much happens with a boat. Like, you got to have a boat. You can't sell the mystery. You got to go out in the boat. And so talk a little bit about how local people have come up to you and said, hey, this really feels real. I really appreciate you showing our area.
Yeah, it's actually really entertaining for me when I do a lot of events and book signings up here as a result of, the series having grown to 6 books. I come all the time in the summer, and now I'm here for a launch party, out of season as well for this new book. And every time I meet locals, they all tell me that they think that maybe one particular character that I have written is based on their uncle, or is, so-and-so based on the person who works at the coffee shop in Alexandria Bay, because I think everyone is looking, I'm like this as a reader too, like when you are so familiar with an area and it means so much to you and you care about it so much, you're kind of, as you said, you're looking to see if the author will get it right. And you're also looking for indications that it's authentic, right? And genuine. And so that's my goal with every one of the books. Is the only place that I stray is if I ever have a place like a business, for example, where a crime occurs, I don't ever, it might be based on a real place, but I wouldn't want to, cause harm to a business or anything, like a real business. So then I kind of fictionalize it to some extent. But otherwise, it's really all based on real places that I have spent time, that I've visited for research purposes more recently, that I try to incorporate in as many ways as I can.
Great. And let's talk a little bit about your reoccurring character.
Yeah.
Shayna Merchant, right? Let's talk a little bit about her and what is the inspiration for her, and why is it important to have a female protagonist in detective crime fiction? It's become a really big thing. A lot of television series are like this now. How do you approach that? And how much of that character was somebody, a conglomeration of other people?
Yeah, not a whole lot, I would say. I was to some extent inspired by, so readers who are familiar with Louise Penny, who writes the amazing Inspector Gamache series set in Quebec. That series is set right where I grew up in the eastern townships of Quebec. So I've always been a big fan of that series. And I always thought to myself, if ever I wrote a detective myself, I would want the detective to have some personality traits like Inspector Gamache. Like, Shayna Merchant is very competent, she's very trustworthy, she's very loyal, but at the same time, she's a little messy at times. She doesn't always get it right. She's human, she makes mistakes. And when I approached the first book, I also wanted to write a character who had that I had an opportunity to dive into her psyche a little bit too, and kind of like her emotional state going into the series, and also how that evolves over the course of the series, like how her character arc from one book to the next changes, and how her personal relationships impact the way that she investigates. All of that, I wanted to build like a really nuanced female detective. There were a lot of books that I had read and, shows that I'd watched and movies that did have female investigators, but it never really, I was having trouble finding content that dug deep enough into that character's head. And that's what I wanted to create with her, was readers really get a sense of who she is, and they really watch, I hope, become attached to her from one book to the next, and really watch her grow as a person and as an investigator.
Right. Well, I think that's really well accomplished. In the book that I read, I mean, she made a couple of mistakes, and I was like, oh, she makes mistakes just like all of us.
Yeah.
I think there's some really great, I think this is a really great trend in crime writing, the flawed female protagonists. I mean, great examples, on television are Mare of Easton, and also Night Country with Jodie Foster.
Yes,
He's a
amazing.
very messed up character.
Totally.
I mean, you see Jodie Foster in ways that you've never seen her before. And I think that that's really helpful for me as a reader to get into the book. I don't, the old style was sort of like they never make mistake. They kind of, everything's mapped out ahead of time. So when the main character sort of discovers or figures it out, we're brought along a little bit more. And so let's talk a little bit about the new book, The Coldest Case. And what's really cool about Tessa is she comes up here to do her launches. And tomorrow in Alexandria Bay, right?
Yes.
At the little tiny library that we've all passed, she's going to have a book signing, and that's the launch of her new book, which comes out in hardcover tomorrow, correct?
It comes out on Tuesday.
On Tuesday.
And the launch
Election
event
Day.
is tomorrow,
Yes.
at 10 a.m.
Yep. So what is the plot of this, and how did that come about?
So the coldest case takes place in one of the coldest winters on record in Jefferson County. There are 8 individuals overwintering on an island called Running Pine Island, and 2 of them are not the hardy locals that have done this for many, many years. 2 of them are actually very young social media influencers that have come to the island to build a social media account, which has taken off. They got there in the summer. Now we're in February. It's really blown up. They are becoming quite popular. But in the meantime, the locals don't really appreciate the fact that their island is all of a sudden getting all of this attention. They are there because they like the solitude and they like the, remote kind of off the grid living. And then one of the 2 influencers goes missing. And so Shana Merchant has to come to Running Pine Island. She is pregnant. She is concerned about her husband and her team, who all, are part of the police force investigating this. There's a lot at stake for her and her loved ones. And on top of all of that, the crime, has echoes to a cold case from her past that she has not been able to forget.
Oh, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking already about the book, which I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I will. And how do the local people feel about these interlopers trying to spend winter up here? I mean, there's got to be some kind of comment like they're dumb, because nobody in the right mind would spend winter up here. We're all trying to get away from winter up here.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Having the winter in northern New York be a novel thing must already annoy everybody in the town.
Yeah, exactly. I actually did quite a lot of research into this and interviewed a gentleman who had done this, who has overwintered many, many years. And he gave me a lot of information about just how dangerous it is, even to try to get across the river. In the book, the river is almost entirely frozen so I should note that Running Pine Island, which is fictional, is based on Grindstone Island. So from Clayton on the mainland to Grindstone Island in the book, which is, of course, Running Pine Island, is mostly frozen, but there are patches where the ice is, soft and it's dangerous and people are taking snowmobiles across, and it's really a very treacherous lifestyle in reality, in real life, but as well as in this book. And that was completely intentional for me to pick such a treacherous setting, because in a thriller, in a mystery like this type of book, crime fiction, where you want it to be compelling and you want the reader to be on the edge of their seat the entire way through, the more conflict and danger, that I can throw as the author at the protagonist and the people around her, the better.
Well, it's kind of like, most of us up here know this. If it's super, super cold and the river freezes, it's safer than if it's half frozen. Right? That's the problem. It's really hard to negotiate a river that's half frozen. If it's not frozen at all and there's no ice, then even if it's cold, you can still get across it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think a lot of people who read the book, locals especially, are going to kind of shake their head at some of the decisions that the characters make, honestly. Like there's one scene where someone is crossing in a homemade airboat, which, as you can imagine, is probably not the best or safest idea, and it's windy. But I think a lot of the situations that Shana gets in this book, and really all the books in the series, will resonate with people who know this area so well, because they've been in similar situations themselves. They've had to deal with the weather and, dangerous circumstances out on the river.
Right. Well, great. Cool. Well, can you talk a little about some of the other events you have coming up for the launch?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So actually, I have on my website, which is just tessawegert.com, a whole list of events. Most of the other events are down in Connecticut, where I currently live, but I do have the one in Alexandria Bay up here. And then I also am doing an event in Vermont for anyone who has, family members or friends in Vermont that want to check that out. That's on November 14th at the Phoenix Bookstore. I'm actually doing an event at Mohegan Sun, the casino in Connecticut, on the 20th. So I'm kind of all over the place. Really excited about the timing of this release as well, going into the chillier weather, even though it doesn't feel like it right now. I think that's coming for all of us. So the feedback that I've gotten from early readers so far, which makes me very happy, is that you should read this book with a blanket or by a roaring fire, because I do try to really get into the atmosphere and make it as, vivid and tangible as I could make it for readers.
Well, we are enjoying this freakishly warm weather, but we don't ever enjoy it too much, because we know it's inevitable that it's going to get cold.
Exactly.
Well, great. And what do you have in store in the future? Is this the last in the Shana Merchant stories, or are you on to another? Are you interested in just doing an individual books or another series, perhaps?
So I'm very excited to report that I am just about to launch next year a spin-off series that will also take place here. It's called the North Country Novel Series. And it will all be set, again, in the Thousand Islands with a lot of the same characters from the Shana Merchant series. But instead of being written from Shana Merchant's point of view with her as the primary narrator, it will be from multiple points of view. So actually readers can jump in having read all the Shana Merchant books or just go in and start fresh with the series and get to know these characters who many of whom are a part of the Shana Merchant series already, but now you get to see them and also Shana through a different lens. She will make an appearance many times in this upcoming series. So I'm really excited. I wasn't ready. I am working on some standalones actually, but I wasn't ready to entirely leave the Thousand Islands. There's too much interesting material here and too much interesting, geography to look at, and I wasn't ready to let it go.
Right. Well, we really appreciate you shining the light on the area, even if it's a little dark light. But all these books, really have a feel for the area. I can't wait to read The Coldest Case. And you will find the link to Tessa's website in this article. And you can also buy the book starting the 5th, correct?
Yes, and actually, I think if you go to the little bookstore in Clayton, they have early copies, and I will be signing those copies. So you could get a signed copy if you go there.
Right, you can get signed copies at the little bookstore in Clayton, New York, and we like to keep it local.
Yeah.
Tessa, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you
so
much,
enjoyed
Craig.
this.
This was wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.
Check out entertainment news on Craig's to-do list at WWNYTV.com.